stories, wonderful traditional stories, and also authored stories that deal with that. But I tend to just write things, and I write it down as Eddie Dream. It was the one again, and he's younger than he was when he died, but he's got something we both know is deadly, and I think he's had it before, and we're talking about him getting him better. And he's being strange, old for his age, but mucking about, and I'm letting him because I know that this may be the last day he's alive. And he knows that I know that this may be the last day he's alive, but neither of us says that this may be the last day he's alive. And I notice he's wearing the green woolen top he wore when he's very young. And now, in daylight and the dream is over, I realise I haven't thought of this top for years. My picture of it must have been stored away in my head without my knowing it was there, but that's the least of it. It's sitting on the edge of my bed, knowing that he's not here, he'll never be here, and that moment in the dream where I let him fool around was about loving him being here. And one of the things about poems that you quite often try to do is you try to write the poem in a way that represents the way you were thinking, or the way the thing is. You know, some people, one word for it is obviously onomatopoeia. When you say splosh, it sounds like splosh, and that's you're trying to imitate the sound of splosh. But there's another thing if you say stream of consciousness, in a way you're trying to write as resembles your inner speech. We don't know whether it is or it isn't, but that's what you're trying to do. Or if you try to write a poem about a waterfall, you might like to try and make it sound like a waterfall. And so I know that I wanted to try and get to the, and I'm going to use a dodgy word here, authentic. I was going to try and be authentic to how the dream felt in the way that I put the words together. And that's part of this business of me going back to that word memorable. That one of the ways in which, when you write a particular kind of free verse poem, not always, there's no rules here, that you try to get to the feel of how that feeling felt. Yes, that's deliberately tautological. Yeah, that you want to try and get to what it felt like. And if you take the case of a dream, you want to try and write like you are in the dream. So that's how that came about, if you like. I was brought up in the London suburbs, and the London suburbs, I guess, are quite like a lot of suburbs, apart from the Parisian ones. And in the 1950s, and I often think about the 1950s, what was it special? What was special about them? And one of the things that was special about them, and this only occurred to me about a year ago, was that the war wasn't long before. I don't know why it's taken me so long to get there, but I was born in 1946, so I didn't notice the war much, as it ended in 1945, for those of you that, for people like me who'd forgotten. And that those people, all those people, those teachers and parents, they'd all lived through it. But we didn't know that. They were just people who were being strict, or they were being nervous, or they were being anxious, or they were trying to run our lives in a particular way. But they'd all been through the war and also through the Depression. And I often think about that, and little fragments come to mind, and many of these poems are fragments. This one's called 1954, The Wonder of Baker Street Station. Arriving in a train that's fitted with brass handles and plates, each with curly writing engraved on, saying, "Live in Metroland, live in Metroland, live in Metroland." The giant electric notice boards with the names of every station in Metroland, flashing on and off, electrically, electrically, electrically. A black bomb from the Second World War with a hole in the side for you to put your money in for wounded soldiers. A black bomb. And a cinema that shows cartoon films all day in the station, all day in the station, all day. The wonder of Baker Street Station. Anyone been to Baker Street Station? It's not quite as wonderful, I'm not quite sure. Some people have said that poetry is, in a way, can be a form of journalism. That what poets do is they go places, they write about it and come back or they go places, come back, and then write about it. And they sometimes tell you about that. That's Wordsworth's poem Daffodils. He went somewhere, he came back, he thought about it, and then he wrote about it, and then he wrote about what he thought about thinking about it. And that's one of the jobs of poetry, which is to make the unfamiliar familiar. So you go somewhere, let's say something happens, like Eddie dying, that may be unfamiliar, and you try to write about it in a way that is possible for other people to understand, so you make it familiar. The more common aspect of poetry that we've heard of is the opposite, defamiliarization. That's to say, there are many familiar things about us, these lights, this room, this microphone, eating an apple, and the job of a poet is to defamiliarize it, to make the familiar unfamiliar. And possibly you're doing both at the same time. So I sometimes think that what I'm doing with very ordinary things is sometimes doing both. At the second floor, we heard a voice inside the lift, the elevator, say, "Second floor, going up." But the second floor was the top floor. Where were we going? Let's keep an eye on the time. I treasure all sorts of things about when I was a kid, and one of the strange things about my parents, which they acknowledged after they'd left the Communist Party, was that they were strangely libertarian. Most people in the Communist Party, if you may have noticed if you ever knew anybody, was that libertarianism and communism don't really go too well together. And my parents discovered this around about 1956, which coincided with some tanks moving westwards, and also with us going to East Germany, which in itself was a rather extraordinary experience for a 10-year-old, I can tell you. Anyway, so they left, and the more I think about it was that their lives were resolved at that point, that they left the Communist Party and discovered a particular kind of educational philosophy that couldn't possibly have been contained within that organisation, which is a form of child-centred libertarian education, which they wrote about in a famous book in Britain called The Language of Primary School Children. And but I think back to my childhood and that kind of freedom and liberty that they gave us, me and my brother, and I sort of often wonder about the roots of it. My dad was born in America. He was born in Brockton, Massachusetts, and came to Britain when he was 2, when his parents split. And he came to Britain with his mother, but he never naturalised to become a Brit, partly, I think, because, either fictitiously or otherwise, he imagined that he'd never be able to naturalise because he was a communist, that Brits weren't too happy about importing communists. So he never did naturalise, so he ended up in the American Army. And his first stationing, or whatever you call it, his first, what is it called? First posting, that's the word, thank you. There's some people in the room know. His first posting was in England. So he was at the American University in Shrivenham. Now, I don't know whether you know about this organisation, but it's a rather extraordinary and amazing and wonderful thing, which I've been researching recently, because he only talked about it occasionally. The American Army decided and realised that there was going to be peace, and that if they had peace, they would have to work out what would happen to all these guys, some of whom were quite educated, and some of them were extremely educated. So they set up an American university, and partly out of the war zone, they set it up in Shrivenham in England. So my dad's first posting, having lived in England for the whole of his life, was in England. And it's here he met someone who some of you will know or know of, called Wayne C. Booth. My middle name is Wayne, which is in 1946 when I was born. I was, I think, the only English-born Wayne in existence. But I was named after Wayne C. Booth, who at that time had not written what became an incredibly important book, which is a Bible to many of us, called The Rhetoric of Fiction. Anyway, I often look at the books my dad brought back from the American Army University in Shrivenham, and they are a wonderful and brilliant set of books of the finest liberal tradition of North America. They are an incredible set of books. You just have to open, for example, Louis Untermeyer's anthology of modern American poetry, or some of Van Doren's books, or even the textbooks, the philosophy textbooks and so on. They are incredible. They are a wonderful set of books, each one of them with a number stamped on it and American Army and things like that all over it. And inside are this wonderful liberal education that was devised at this university that in part helped produce a moment in my dad's and Wayne C. Booth's life. So I'm kind of terribly interested in this aspect, and so I'm in a sense, another job of poets is that you do archaeology, and you can do archaeology on other people or you can do archaeology on yourself. I quite often do it on myself. So here's me being an archaeologist, trying to figure out why and how rather than why, my parents were libertarians. It's called Staying Over. At Malk's flat, there's raisins and tangerine pieces to have in bed. At Mart's house, there's a train set in his bedroom. At Chris's flat, there's a lift to play in till bedtime. At Malk's, we go over to his Armenian granny's, and she cooks us pilaf. At Mart's, we make tunnels for his train to go through. At Chris's, we go down to the playground and play football tennis for hours. At Malk's, we talk about places far away, like Czechoslovakia and Bulgaria, where his dad goes. At Mart's, we talk about 2 lakes in France, where me and him got lost in the mud and bulrushes, but got back to the campsite okay in the end. At Chris's, we talk about Arsenal and Spurs. He's Spurs, I'm Arsenal. We imagine what it would be like if Arsenal played Spurs in the cup final. At Malk's, his mum and dad are Peggy and Francis, and I love it when Francis comes into our bedroom at bedtime and sings us Barnacle Bill the Sailor. At Mart's, his mum and dad are Lorna and Fred, and I love it when Fred stops wasps stinging me by grabbing them with his fingers. You've got to be quick, he says, and Lorna says, oh, Fred, please. At Chris's, his mum and dad are Reenie and Moish, and I love it when Reenie plays the trick with a plastic egg, and which she serves up in a plate of baked beans, and I believe it's real, and try to stick my fork in the plastic yolk. Not so good at Malk's when we drew pictures on Armenian Granny's doorstep, and she said she couldn't wash it off, and Uncle Felix with the beard went off in a big huff and didn't talk to us. Not so good at Mart's when I threw Mart's baby brother's special extra fast yo-yo over the fence, and when I pretended to put it back on the shelf, Lorna saw that my hand was empty and did a whole tut, tut, tut thing. Not so good at Chris's when we came back from Spurs v Arsenal, and this group of kids surrounded us and poked and prodded us and called us names, and we came back and sat on the sofa and felt bad all evening. I love it that my parents let me go and stay at Malk's, Mart's and Chris's. Some part of them knew that parenting is, you cannot control your children all the time. Some part of them knew that Gibran thing about your children are not your children. That some part of them said, go elsewhere and find out what other parents are like. You might find them to be better than us or worse than us, but it doesn't matter. I don't know. I find it. I've been a parent for many, many years. For 34 years, I'm the longest standing continuous school parent in existence. I've been a school parent for 30 years. I have a 34-year-old and a 5-year-old and plenty in between. And I still haven't learned what my parents learned and knew in the 40s and 50s, and I don't know why. So part of poetry and part of writing that we often leave out, because we have this word writing, which means that. But writing is a verb, somebody once said, didn't they? Somebody wrote a book, I think, called Writing is a Verb. That's to say there is a process called writing. And in the critics, by and large, are much more interested in the writing that is there and less interested in how us people actually do it, or even why we do it. But part of the how is that you have to be prepared to investigate. That part of writing has to be prepared to ask questions about the things that you're writing about. And here's me trying to do that again. In fact, I often say to children, look, the great thing, you know how stories, you've got to end them. The great thing about poems is you don't have to. In fact, a great way to end a poem is with a question, because you don't know the answer, and it's okay, they're allowed in poems, you see. So actually a poem could be just one question. You know, it could be, why do buffaloes eat spaghetti? Which is what my son once asked me, and I said, do they? And he said, I don't know. Anyway, but why does Mum keep cans of corned beef in the cupboard? Not just 1 or 2 cans, stacks of them. Does she think that one day we'll have a corned beef party? Does she think that people will come over and she'll say, "Surprise!" and pull back a cloth, and there in front of everyone, the table will be full of cans of corned beef, and then everyone will sit round, opening cans of corned beef, and we'll sit and eat it saying, corned beef, this is nice, nice party, yeah. Or does she think that one day all the shops will be closed and we won't be able to buy any food, but we'll be all right because we'll be able to eat corned beef every day for months and months? And people will be jealous of us, and they'll be queuing up outside our house shouting, "Let us in! We want corned beef! We want corned beef!" I don't like corned beef. I don't like the way there are these chunks of fat sitting on it, and when you eat it, it sticks to the roof of your mouth. And now I think of it, I've never seen Mum eating it either. Why does Mum keep cans of corned beef in the cupboard? Once there was a terrible disease in the country where corned beef comes from. It was an outbreak of typhoid, they said. In the newspapers and on the TV, they kept saying to us, "Don't eat the corned beef. Don't eat the corned beef." Mum went to the cupboard, took down one of the cans and said, "Better not open that till the typhoid outbreak's over." Why does Mum keep cans of corned beef in the cupboard? And I don't really know. I don't know. I mean, my mum was... you heard Camilla say that she was meditative, in my word. She was meditative, how do you say that? But she was also mysterious. Because when I run the thing on my retina, pulling the can, saying that, "Better not open that till the typhoid outbreak's over," she's just looking at us. And she's looking at us to see whether we know... No, I don't know why she's looking at us, but it's a little twinkle in her eye that I never quite figured out whether she knew that she was saying these things or whether she only found out she was saying something like that halfway through and then wondered whether we had spotted it. I never knew whether it was a deliberate mistake or otherwise, that when the dishwasher broke down, she called it a wish dasher. And she said, "Put it in the wish dasher." And we just looked at her, and she just looked at us. And but you know, was it a mistake? I don't know. Okay, I'll read you just one or two other things. I do try to write in different ways, and every now and then an object or a creature or an event seems to demand that you write in a particular kind of way. I've already mentioned this idea that poetry, that one of the things it does to make itself memorable is to make it sound itself like the thing that it's talking about. Right, now I know this word is problematic in different parts of the world. Daddy longlegs. That's what we call a crane fly, yes? Okay, so this is a thing that it's a creature that it looks like a gigantic mosquito, but it's utterly harmless, yes? So it's got a long abdomen and 4 wings, and it can be about that big or it can be about that big. In Australia, daddy longlegs is a very large grey spider that its other name is a huntsman. Yes, is that what? Right, okay. So that's a daddy longlegs. This is a little flying thing that's completely harmless, but kids hate them. Okay? They're absolutely harmless. Dads and mums are sometimes called upon to do things to them. This one's called Daddy Longlegs in a Hotel Room. Everyone's ducking out of the way of you and your furry legs. You are like eyelashes with wings, fluttering and flittering about, bumping into lampshades. Ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta. A jerky drum solo. You feel like a spider's web when you brush across our faces. Ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta. Kill it, Dad! Kill it, Dad! They think your hairs could bite and sting. We stare at your up the wall, down the wall dancing. If we're not careful, you could jitterbug down our necks. Ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta. I switch out the light. It's quiet. We lie and wonder if there'll be a moment when we'll feel your whiskers whisper across our skin. Ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta. In the morning, the bathroom is white and glary. You're flat out on the tiles. Your legs splayed. The jazz is over. Okay, I will read you one more to finish, and it might be nice to have some questions, I think. I know possibly in these talks you don't